Who's amazing?
Barry, they lost so much weight, you can hardly eat them.
What page are you on?
I didn't send today. I didn't send an email to everybody.
Oh,
There's nobody on. Maybe they don't think there's a share tonight. Oh, here we go.
thank God. Jacob.
He sent to
Very
everybody.
strange flavor.
Is it? What is it?
I don't know what it is. It's very strange.
Grapefruit?
It doesn't taste like grapefruit, but it could be in that family. It's really strange, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's healthier than.
Ernie, have you ever heard of this? Pamplemousse?
He wouldn't try. He doesn't like.
Doesn't it
seltzer.
sound strange?
He doesn't seltzer. Yeah, it's good. I like.
I don't eat, this is the only place I drink carbonated drink.
that.
I drink water.
That's good. Plain water?
Yeah.
That's very
The
good.
other thing I do is I take one diet each. And I split it into drink.
Uh-huh. And you put a little. Good for taste, yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Good evening, everybody.
Ernie, what page? So you want
No,
water?
it's
I
fine,
can
I'm
give you
not
water
finished
too. I can give you water also. You want water?
I'm fine. Admit it.
233.
I just got whatever.
233.
Done, I just like whatever they have.
233. We're in 233. We are talking about Hamotzi. Last week we emphasized holding the bread with all 10 fingers and the various remozim to that. Now we're going to talk about the prop. And by the way, everyone, I get in Chodesh.
I'm getting a Chodesh.
Safe Chodesh.
Right.
The dinim of the 9 days started about a half hour ago. So the proper manner to cut bread or challah. In earlier times, entire loaves of bread were usually served at a meal. We're not talking about just Shabbos, we're talking about every day. Accordingly, there were two questions that had to be addressed. Where should one cut the bread? And how much should be cut? And should one cut the bread before or after reciting the bracha? Nowadays, most people do not eat a full loaf of bread during the week. Therefore, many of these halachos in this section are not applicable. Nevertheless, on Shabbos, there's a mitzvah of Lechem Mishneh, reciting Hamotzi on 2 whole loaves of challah. So these halachos are going to be quite relevant on Shabbos. Let us first begin by addressing the first question of where should one cut the bread and how much should be cut? The Gemara in Sanhedrin tells a story relevant to this issue about the Amoira Ravashi and Menashe, king of Yehuda. Rav Ashi Uki Ashloisha Malachim. Rav Ashi was giving a drasha, and he was going to reach the sugya about discussing 3 kings. Omar, lemochar niftach b'chaverim. He said, tomorrow we're going to start with the sugya of the 3 kings. Also, Menashe is chazil lebechame. So, one of the kings that were going to be discussed was Menashe. So Menashe Melech was a big Rasha, appeared to Rav Ashi in a dream. Omar, chavercha v'chaverai davucha karislan. Now, even though they were Rishoim, they were Tamei Chachamim. So Menashe in the dream says to him, what? You called us your chaverim and the chaverim of your father? You are not our equal. So in fact, Menashe Melech, to show how little Rav Ashi knew compared to them, asked him, where do you start cutting the loaf of bread? So Rav Ashi said, I don't know, you just cut the bread. I didn't know there's a special place that you have to start cutting it from. Means from where you're supposed to cup the bread after you recite Amotzi. You haven't learned that. And you're calling us your colleagues? Amrle, Admirle. So Rav Ashi said, okay, Menashe, teach me. Tomorrow, I will mention this halacha in your name. So Menashe told him, Karim Bishula, that where you cut the loaf, where the crust develops as a result of baking. Okay. Rav Ashi said to Menashe Melech, you're so wise. My time of kapachisel of Avodah, how come you worship Avodah Zarah? If you would have been there, you would lift the hem of your cloak and run after the Avodah Zarah, or run after him to chase the Avodah Zarah. I'd like to explain this Gemara. Well, let's read Rashi. Let's see how Rashi brings it. Where the bread crusted. So even our breads, they're crispy on the top, but not on the bottom, where they face the oven. Milmala, or misviva sapat, or the edge, or sometimes bishulav, the bottom, depends where the fire is. Ava be'emtza lo, but not in the middle. So she mevina lefon of prusa shalach. They brought him a slice of bread, and he has to make a motzi and cut it. When we were kids, we didn't like the crust. We only wanted to eat the soft part. So that's not where you cut it. You should cut it where the crust is. Lishnachrina, mehecha dekadim, klomer mehecha shemagdim lafos, the place where it bakes fastest. It means really the same place as in the first shot. Lishnachrina mehecha degomer bishula, where the baking is finished. Bimakom shalechem afu yafa, where it's very well baked. V'loma also makom shekoim bashul, but Rashi says Rishon and Nira. I just want to explain the Gemara that we said that Menashe Melech told him that if you would have lived in my time, you would have run after the Avodah Zarah, you'd have picked his. Okay, so we know that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of the Gimel Averos. That's Bayis Rishon. Because of Gilui Arayos, sexual immorality, Shvichus Dami, murder, and Avodah Zarah, the three cardinal sins. Bayis Sheni was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam. But the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed partly because of Avodah Zarah. So when the Jews came back to Eretz Yisrael from Bavel after the 70 years in exile, one of the first things that the Anshe Knesset Gdola did is they davened that the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah should be taken away. There's a Gemara that goes through this. We all know what desire for sexual desire is. We understand that kind of Yetzer Hara. When we drive by a totem pole in Alaska or something, do you have any desire to go out there and worship the totem pole? It's because b'chush we understand somehow this Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah has been removed from us. Chazal wanted to prevent another churban. So they said, oh, let's get rid of the Yetzer Hara for Gilui Arayos. So then even the chickens weren't laying eggs. Well, you need food, so they had to get rid of that. That Avodah Zarah, that Yetzer Hara, they had to leave in place. Now, why? Now, what else happened during the period of Bayis Sheni? We see that there's no Nevuah anymore. There was Nevuah in Bayis Rishon. There's no Nevuah anymore in Bayis Sheni. So the Michtav Me'Eliyahu Rav Dessler, who taught at Gateshead Yeshiva, passed away in the early 50s. He wrote famous series of Musar essays called Michtav Me'Eliyahu. He describes why this had to happen. There is a pasuk called Zelu Umazeh Nivra, that Zelu Umazeh means we all have free will. We have Bechira. Each one of us have a different point by which, like most of us, if we see a piece of ham, that's way below our Bechira point. We're not going to have any desire to eat a piece of ham. But if it's but there is a thing that we might have a desire to eat. So it's above our Bechira point. So where those points are set is different for individual people. But in general, in order to get credit for a mitzvahs, we have to have free will to choose. If we have no free will to choose, we're not going to get credit if we do something well. So, for example, a malach sees Hashem, he says, Kodosh, Kodosh, Kodosh. He can't do anything else. He has no free will. That's how he was created. We have free will. We can choose to worship Hashem or not. Now, if we saw Hashem, we would worship him. So that's the point. That is, when there was a Beis HaMikdash with a lot of nisim going on every day, when people bowed down, there was space, that there was no fly, the meat didn't rot. So there was a very high level of kedusha. Person goes to Beis HaMikdash, you're not going to have a bechira, you're going to worship Hashem. So no, they gave Avodah Zarah power. We don't understand what that means, but the Avodah Zarah, people ran after it because it equaled the playing field. You had a choice. You could worship the Avodah Zarah, it had power, or you could worship Beis HaMikdash, it had power. But if the Beis HaMikdash was all powerful and the Avodah Zarah weren't powerful, there would be no bechira. You wouldn't get credit for worshiping Hashem. So the Avodah Zarah had power. That's what Menashe Melech says to Rav Ashi. If you would have been there when I was there, you would have run after it the same way I went after it. It was powerful. So when the Chazal came and abolished the Avodah Zarah, so Avodah Zarah didn't have any power anymore, Nevuah had to go away. Because if Nevuah remained, but there was no power of Avodah Zarah, again, it would be no Zelu Umat Zeh. There would be no this versus this. There wouldn't be an equal playing field. So if Ruach Kedusha went away with Nevuah, if the Tumah went away, the Avodah Zarah, so they had to get rid of Ruach Nevuah as well. That's just an interesting aside. So according to the first two explanations of washing, one must break the bread from outside of the loaf where it is crusty, but makes no difference it's from the top or the bottom. According to the third explanation, one must select the place that is baked best and slice the loaf from there. Although Rashi himself prefers the first explanation, the Tur in citing the Gemara follows Rashi's third explanation, that one cuts the loaf of bread where it is baked the most, and he doesn't really mention the first two explanations. Says the Tur in Orach Chaim, you should cut it in the place that it's baked the best. But Mokum Shenefa Heitev. The Beis Yosef, the main commentator of the Tur, seems to agree fundamentally with the Tur that the third explanation is the accepted one, and even supports it based on our teaching in Masechta Derech Eretz. The Beis Yosef then cites the Hagos Maimonios, who was a commentator on the Rambam, who brings a difference of opinions as to whether the top or bottom is baked first. Both of those approaches appear to accept the second formulation, that we follow the portion that is baked first, but they argue over which portion is actually baked first. Divrei Rabbeinu, the Tur Nirim, Shem Kalosh Nachron. The second approach of Rashi, which is baked, which is the one that is baked first. The Chei Nirim Divrei Rambam, Shekosav Beperek Zayim Ilchos Brachos, Ve'enu Botzel B'Mokom Shebishal Yofe Yofe. You cut it where it's baked well. Masechet Derech Eretz, Tanya, Lo Yifra Sodom Amotzi, Mimokam Arach, you don't cut it from the soft part, El Mimokam Akosha, from the hard part. The Hagos Maimonios Kotz Beperek HaNizkar, B'Shem Sefer HaMitzvos, the Sefer HaMitzvos of the Rambam, Sheyesh Libtzoa, Mitzad HaTachton Shalpas, you should cut the bottom of the bread. Shesham Mizbah Shel Tchila, Kisham Nidbak Tchila. Remember, they used to stick the loaves to the side of the oven. And that's how they did it in France. Aval Ashkenaz in Germany, they would cut from the top. They would say that part is baked first. The Aram Mirattenberg, who lived in Worms, he used to cut one of the two sides to fulfill both opinions. Now, how does the Shulchan Aruch paskin? He cites the Tur, following the third opinion Rashi, and the Ramah appears to follow the second approach, as he adds the custom of the Maram of Rattenberg that was signed by Beis Yosef to fulfill both approaches mentioned in the Hagos Maimonios, and to cut the two sides at once. You should cut it where it's baked the best. Ubepasti done with our loaves. Yesh livtzoa b'tzad hapas. V'yachtoch ma'at mitzad elyon v'atachto. You cut a little bit from the top and the bottom. Now, the Bir Alocha, who is the Chafetz Chaim, explains that the Ramah follows the second approach in Rashi, even though the Ramah does not specify that he is disagreeing with the Shulchan Aruch. Ubepasti don v'da there haRamah afshas zochar dvar bistam. He didn't say that it was bringing a different opinion than the Shulchan Aruch. They call Malkam hu kamosh shai kotzav v'yesh mishta omer. It's usually like a yesh, like stam v'yesh. The Ramah is usually v'yesh. The Maran Shulchan Aruch is going to cut at the place where it's baked the breast. You should cut it from the top of the loaf, or metachtono, or from the bottom, so not from the middle. He's positive like the second version of the last version of Rashi, where you have the text of Gemara where the crust forms. Not the korim, but the kodim, where it happened first. According to the Bir Halacha, those who follow the Shulchan Aruch do not need to be careful to cut from the side, but just to cut the loaf from the place where it is baked well, not from the soft part. While those who follow the Ramah should take a piece from one of the sides. The Mishnah Berurah adds several practical points to the discussion. Botzea bepas b'mako hainu la'achar shenoto yodav lachin. after the person has washed his hands, and he wants to make a bracha on the bread and eat. So, because of the respect for the bracha, he should cut b'makom shenef eitiv, where it's baked well. You should cut where it's hard, not where it's soft. And then b'tzad pas, the Gemara Isa l'chad girsa shebotzim b'makom shematchil pas likrom l'izbashel, from the place where the bread begins to crust. V'yesh mi poskim, there are those halachic decisors, shesfir ludu tzada elyon me'apas, who says it's the top of the loaf. Shehu neged avir atanu, that is closest to the air of the oven. V'yesh oimrim sheshara tachta mizbashel chila, that is the bottom of the loaf that bakes first. Shemunach al karkiyat atanu, that is resting on the floor of the oven. Lachein tzarech lachtoch b'natzad, by cutting from the side, which is basically both from the top and the bottom, you fulfill both opinions. Footnote: it seems from here that the Mishnah Berurah understood the first and second approaches to be identical, as he first quotes the first interpretation, and then offers the two customs for how to understand the second approach of the part of which part the bread is baked first. This may differ somewhat from the approach suggested in the Bir Halacha, that the first and the second approach do not agree with each other. Back to the Mishnah Berurah. The Yatzideshe Beprusa, if you have a piece of bread, Yachol Livtzah Mamakam Shenifras. Well, you can cut it, it's already been cut, it's already a slice of bread. You don't need to cut it from the side. Cut it from the top or the bottom, where there's a crust. If the part of the loaf is burnt or in dirt, you certainly should not cut the loaf there. Now, the Piskei Teshuvos clarifies that the halachos of cutting the bread do not apply when eating a roll or a slice of bread, since cutting it is not necessary in order to eat it. Omnam kol ha'omer ein el b'kikar lechem gadol, we're talking about a whole loaf. Aval achmaniyah, a roll, or chalak tana, chatichas lechem tana, prusas lechem umatzah, pieces, be'elu ein omra din shalat chol schitu l'fnei habracha. You don't have to have a cut before you make the bracha. Similarly, there's no special place that you have to cut such a small loaf. If you're eating a slice of bread or a small roll, right after you wash your hands and dry it, you can hold on to the piece of bread with both hands and make a bracha, no cutting. Ula achra bracha, lishbor chaticha, you can break a piece, litvol b'melach, to dip in salt, v'lechol. Vein tzarech lishtamis b'sakin gam lo achra bracha, you don't have to use a knife. So we're going to see that this cutting is, according to some opinions, has to be done even before you make the bracha of hamotz. So we're going to deal with when to cut the bread. The Gemara in Brachos relates that the Amoraim disagree about whether to slice the bread during or after the bracha of hamotzi. Dam Rav Chia. This is Masechta Brachos Daf Lamed Tes. Omen Aleph Lamed Beis. Sarech shetich lebracha im apas. And the bracha should conclude when you start breaking the loaf. Amar Rava. Rava understands that to be mavarech va'achar kach botzeah. First, make the bracha and then cut. But nardoi avdi Rav Chia, that you start cutting before you make the bracha. Rabbanan Avdi Kirov. Amar Ravina, Amar Li Aim, that she got in the sword, Ravina got in the sword from his mother, that Avucha Avid Kireb Chia, that your father did like Rav Chia, Rav Chia Tzarech Shetichle Brocha Mapas, that the bracha concludes with when the beginning of the breaking of the loaf of bread occurs. But Rabbanan Avdi Kirov of Hilchos Kirov, the Amar Mavarch V'achar Kach Potzeh. The halacha is like Rava that you make the bracha first and then you cut it. According to Rav Chia, one must conclude the bracha while simultaneously breaking the bread. According to Rava, one must recite the entire bracha while the loaf is whole and cut it only afterwards. The Gemara concludes that the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rava, that the bracha is recited first. This is how most of the Rishonim rule, including the Rambam. Balabais mavarach hamotzi, umashlim habracha, v'achar kach potzeh. So the Rambam says you make the bracha and then cut. The Talmidei Rabbi Yonah comment that because of this ruling, some individual are careful not to cut the bread until after the bracha is complete, to ensure that it is still whole, as it is preferable to recite the bracha on a whole loaf when possible. However, the Talmidei Rabbi Yonah write that it's still preferable to first partially cut the bread in such a way that it is still attached to the loaf. Then after reciting the bracha, one can separate the slice from the loaf more quickly. This practice thereby minimizes the interruption between the bracha and the eating. After the concluding of the bracha, then you cut. However, some don't want to do any cut in the bread before the bracha. Because if you cut it, even though the slice might not have come off the bread, it's still attached, in a way, the loaf is not complete. But vein zenira, he says, you make a little slice, a little cut, but that the loaf is still attached completely. Then you go to where you made that little slice and cut completely. You shouldn't just recite the bracha and cut with the knife before eating, because that seems to be hafsaka between eating and the bracha. The Shulchan Aruch rules, like the Talmidei Rabbi Yonah. The Mishnah explains that this method is designed to minimize the amount of time in between the recital of the bracha and eating the bread. Yachtoch prusa sabitzia. You should begin the cut that you're going to eventually go through it. V'tzarech lachtoch ma'at, but only a little bit. Shem yochaz b'prusa yalish shar kikar imo, that you could still pick up the loaf and the whole loaf comes with it. Shem lo ken chashav kaprusa, because otherwise it's not considered whole anymore. V'yanichenem uchuberes lepas, you should leave the slice still connected to the loaf. V'yaschil levarach v'achar shitzayim habracha yafridena. When you finish the bracha, you can separate the slice from the loaf. But you have to make sure that when you finish the bracha, the loaf should be intact. And the Mishnah Berurah explains, Ubira inyanhu, the Medina mavarach v'achar kach poires. Mikra din, you should make the bracha and then cut. Kedei shetia kol habracha pas shlema. So the bracha is on a complete loaf. Shu derech kavod lebracha. Ach kedesh lo yashiu rav. But we don't want there to be a big delay between the conclusion of the amotzi and the eating. Ben habracha lachila. V'yir kavsaka kasva poiskim the tov lechatchila shiachtoch ma'at bekikar kodem shemaskil habracha. You should cut a little bit of the loaf before he makes the bracha. Shira chituch yeh ma'at, like a very, very small cut. And then separate the slice from the loaf.
So actually make a cut, not just a mark. But some people would just.
Correct. Saul is noting that so far we've been learning that it seems like you make a real cut, not just a little mark in the challah, but a real cut to get it ready to be divided. That's what we've been learning so far, and that's what Saul points out. Could you bring that jug? So the discussion so far concerning when to cut the loaf of bread is relevant to one who eats a loaf of bread on a weekday as well. However, on Shabbat, one is required to recite Hamotzi on 2 whole loaves, known as Lechem Mishneh. Therefore, that means even on Monday or Tuesday, and you're going to start off with a big loaf of bread, so you want to make the bracha in the same way, the way we've described. That you make a little slice before you make the bracha. Now, Shabbos, you have to recite the motzi on 2 shleimim, known as Lechem Mishneh. So some Rishonim, such as Tosfos, writes that on Shabbos, one should not cut the challah before reciting the bracha. The reason that one may unintentionally separate the slice completely from the challah, and you'll be left without Lechem Mishneh when reciting Hamotzi. Says Tosfos V'Hilchasa, Umiya b'Shabbos nochum lahachmir levarach kodem sheyachto. On Shabbos, you should make the bracha, not make any cut. Because you might end up slicing it before you complete the bracha. And az lo yelo lechem mishneh. So the Ramah, the way the Mishnah Berurah explains him, codifies the ruling of Tosfos as halacha, but adds that if one partially cut a slice, you have still fulfilled the mitzvah of lechem mishneh properly. Uv'Shabbos lo yachtoch b'kikar ad achra bracha. On Shabbos, don't make any cut until after the bracha. Kadesh you are kikar shleimos, because you want the primary thing is to have sholem. However, if he made a cut in the bread before the bracha, the way he did, eino mazik. And the Mishnah Berurah explains, V'hu adin b'yontif. It's the same on yontif. Then also you have to use lechem mishneh. If you make a slice before the bracha, we're concerned that it's going to ruin the lechem mishneh. It's not going to be shleimim. You're going to cut one so deep that that it is like, let's say you made a cut very deep. You pick up the loaf, and the piece is hanging. Then it wouldn't be good. Says the Mishnah Berurah on Shabbos. The after yidei zeh yitzarach yidei chaticha lishos tzas bein habracha lachila, like it happens with us on Shabbos. You cut the bread, everybody's silent while they're waiting for their bread. So there's a little hefsek between the bracha and the eating. Lo chashiva hefsek, even dahu tzarach achila. Listen, cutting and spreading and handing it out, it's part of the purpose of eating. So it's not considered a hefsek. Since there's no reason to have sholem, the issue of lechem mishneh, it's just a covet for the bracha. But the ikr of lechem mishneh does not apply. Oh, during the weekday you could be machmir to begin the cut even before the bracha. And the Mishnah said it's eino mazik if you did cut on Shabbos, ritzon lomar, shlo hiftir al yazeh lechem mishneh. If you can prick up the loaf and the slice that you tried to make still comes with it, it's not a problem. So from the Mishnah Berurah here it emerges that on Shabbat one should not cut the challah at all due to concern that it might break. Nevertheless, the custom of many Ashkenazim is to make a small symbolic mark on the challah using the knife. And the source for this is the Mishnah Berurah in Hilchos Shabbos, based on the Magen Avraham. Ayin le'el b'simin kuv sach zayin. Shlo yachto pekikar arach rabracha geteshiu abracha shleimus. V'amedagdikim regilim lirshom b'sakim kodim bracha. So that which Saul was talking about, that people make a mark with the knife. These are the medagdikim to just make a mark before the bracha to fulfill every shita. This custom of making a mark on the challah on Shabbos does not apply to small challahs or rolls. Similar to the ruling of the Piskei Tshuva in source 29, that the rules of where and when to cut the bread does not apply to small rolls or challah. Now, distributing the bread or challah to other people. There are guidelines within the halacha as to how to distribute the piece of bread to others. As with respect to the rules of when and where to cut the bread discussed above, the rules concerning the distribution are mainly relevant nowadays on Shabbat, when everyone eats together and one person recites Hamotzi for everyone else. See the Shulchan Aruch, who rules that if a group of people are sitting down together at the table for a bread meal, it is preferable for one person, usually the balabais, to recite the bracha v'motzi for everyone. The Rambam writes that when cutting and distributing bread or challah to others at a meal, one should place the bread before them, not place it directly in their hand. Placing bread directly in the hands of another is a practice reserved exclusively for an avel, a mourner, who should not be given bread in a normal manner. So we don't do that on a normal Shabbos. The Rambam says when you give out the bread, put it in front of each person. And then he reaches out and takes the piece. The one who cuts the bread should not put the piece directly in the hands of the other person unless he's an avel. The Avudraham suggests that the reason for the practice of placing the bread in the hand of the avel may be based upon a homiletic interpretation of a pasuk in Eicha. Says the Avudraham, Efshar shatam ze mishum shnemar pershat Sion biadeh, that Zion spreads her hands and there's no one to comfort her. Hu remez leprusa samotzi. So the pirsha, prusa, you put it directly in the hands of an avel. Rabbeinu Manoach writes, that Rabbeinu Manoach was also a Rishon, so was the Avudraham, writes that on Shabbat it's permissible to place bread in front of a mourner in the normal way. Cause of our Harav Rabbeinu Manoach B'Shem HaGaonim, the B'Shabbos Pors Kedarko Shein Avelos B'Shabbos. On Shabbos you can give the bread to the avel the same way you always do. You can put it in front of them. The Shulchan Aruch also rules that one should not place bread in people's hands unless they are mourners. You give the piece in front of each person. And he takes it. The cutter of the bread doesn't put the bread into the hands unless he's an oven. Because the Mishnah Berurah clarifies some of the points concerning the parameters of the issue of how to give bread to a mourner. The Mishnah Berurah notes in the first paragraph brought below that one may not throw bread to others around the table. You don't throw the bread. Even though the bread doesn't become disgusting, you just made a bracha on this. You throw it; it's a bizoyon. it's degradation. So that's why we put it in a basket. We pass the basket around. Each person takes from the basket instead of taking it from in front of them, because how are we going to get it in front of everybody? You can't throw it.
Shabbos, I was at someone's house, Sparty, and he purposely threw bread around the table to the people to show, I asked him, what's this? And then how he says to show abundance. I don't know.
Okay, Saul was describing that he was in a house of a Sephardi and he threw the bread to show abundance.
You're saying not to. Doesn't make sense.
I mean, the Mishnah Berurah is an Ashkenazi.
Mhm.
He's a commentator for
Right.
us. The Shulchan Aruch said you do place it in front of each person. It doesn't say anything about throwing it or that it's a simon for abundance.
Mhm.
Haya Avel v'Shabbat's Porter of Kedarko. The Mishnah says you give an Avel bread the same way as anybody else. If you gave it into his hands, you would be showing Avelis, and you're not supposed to show Avelis on Shabbos. And the pasuk is a remez leprusas mashma de ein roy lasus king k'sheina Avel. And you should not do it if you're not an Avel. The lo lisra mazole, it would be like a bad omen for him. Regarding the custom of not placing bread in the hands of another, the Piskei Tshuva writes that since it does not have a clear source in Chazal, there is room for leniency in places where the custom is to be lenient. Let's see the footnote. The Mishnah Berurah has explained that it's forbidden to throw bread even if it won't be ruined because it's degrading to the bread. And this is the accepted halacha for Ashkenazim. But some Sephardim do have the practice of throwing pieces of bread to others around the table if the pieces will not get dirty. So let's see what the Piskei Tshuva says. This issue of you put it in there in front of them, you put it in their hands, has no source. It's the Avudram who mentions it, which was a later Rishon, it's not a Midrashim. Ukvar Kosav Rashba b'Tshuvosov, the Rashba in his Tshuvos wrote, Al minag zeh shelo lateta prusa biyad, zeh medivrei chachamim ulem bevadai, u makor yadu hayali b'zeh v'shachachti, im emtzar achar bdika shlach v'odiyacha. The custom of not putting bread in someone's hands, the Rashba thinks it's certainly from Chazal, and he knew a makor, but he forgot it, and he will send it later on, if he remembers it. This is part of the etiquette of later generations. Before the Rambam. So if there's a custom where they don't worry about this, and the Balabais distributes it by hand, look up the aim is he says it doesn't lead to weakening of a person's muscle. Now, what a kind of hafsaka can you make between making the bracha and eating the bread? Early in the Shir, we cited the Gemara that indicated that in certain cases, speaking about matters related to eating do not constitute a hefsek, though Amoraim disputed which cases were included within this rule. However, the Gemara indicates, lechatchila, one should prepare everything necessary beforehand and refrain from speaking about anything after reciting the brachas hamoitzi. The Rambam rules in this manner that ideally one should not speak after reciting the bracha. But he then rules that if one did speak, all of the examples given in the Gemara are considered related to the eating and are not considered a hefsek, says the Rambam. In general, by blessings, you don't want to make a hefsek between when you made the bracha and when you do the thing. And if you made a real hefsek, you'd have to make a bracha again. If it's in the subject matter, like bring the salt, right, and or bring the knife, he makes the bracha, and before they ate, he says, bring milk, bring salt, or bring the dip, or tnu plenty lechel, or give this bread to this guy to eat, or tnu machal behem, or give food to the animals. So these are all related to the meal. So anything that's similar to this. This is the Rambam. We see from the Rambam, one should never interrupt in between the recital of the bracha and consumption of the food. But if one did interrupt about an issue relating to the meal, you don't have to recite the bracha again. We can deduce from here that if one is interrupted by speaking about a matter not related to the meal, he must repeat the bracha. That's how the Shulchan Aruch reels. Yochal miyad. After the bracha, you should eat. You should not talk between the bracha and the eating. If he talked, he has to make the bracha again. Unless, as we said, the subject matter relates to the meal. Bring the dip, bring the salt. Give to Chaim Yankel to eat. Or give the animal to eat. But the Ramah reminds us we should not make a hefsek.
So Ernie,
Yes, sir.
Ernie, we're allowed to say bring the salt instead of
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That
If
sounds more civil.
It should lechatchila
Yeah.
be brought before. But
Right.
if you made the
But-
bracha and all of a sudden you could say, please bring the salt. And it's
Yeah.
not considered a hefsek.
Okay. Got it. Thanks.
Harold, if you want to keep saying, you can do it.
So the Rokeach was also a Rishon, writes that if one person recites the bracha for the rest of those around the table and eats some of the bread or challah, it is not considered a hefsek if others speak before they eat. So there's you cut a lot of piece of bread. The balabayas should immediately take a piece of bread, because if other people start talking according to the Rokeach, there would not be. It's not a problem of a hefsek anymore, because you made the bracha, you ate it, basically fulfilled it for everybody. If the balabais ate, the other people started talking, already nafki kula, they already were yotzei their mitzvah. Kidemashra b'shili b'chol ma'arvin di'avi liyanuka nafki. And that's how the Ramah rules. The im sach dvorim b'telim, if the balabayas talked not related to the meal, he has to repeat the bracha. And this is somebody else who maybe listened to the bracha. But if the botzea ate already, somebody else talked. It's not a hefsek. Other people didn't eat. The one who cut the bread, if he ate, that clears the problem. They don't even have to eat a piece of bread. They do it to show their love for the mitzvah. But if the guy who made the bracha eats it, that's sufficient. Now, the Mishnah Brura brings achronim who argue with this Ramah. Zeh rak das Ramah. Aval kimat kol achronim cholkim Allah. Usvira lihu. Deloy odif hashomea ma'mevarich atzmo kisesach kodim timasash chazir mevarich. He says all the other achronim learn that the people waiting to get their bread should not talk, even if the botseya had already eaten his. And it would be a hefsek if he talked, and he'd have to make a second bracha. V'chanami hashoyim. If they were mafsik, kodim timasim before they ate, chayzer mevarchim, they have to make the bracha again. V'da od. If the one who made the bracha spoke before he tasted, even though the people at the table, they were quiet. They don't have a bracha. The bracha is ruined. And they have to wait for the botzei to make a second bracha for them to eat. Because they were not yotze with that bracha. The Yalkut Yosef writes that b'di'evet, if one of the other diners around the table began to eat first, before the one who recited the bracha, then speaking is not considered an interruption. Uv'di'evet in diber shomeya, kodim she'itam abotzei. Let's say if one of the listeners spoke before the one who cut ate, so chashav hefsek v'tzarech lazar bracha. So then he'd have to repeat it. But from achal echad b'masur, if one of the diners had eaten, so that's a kula according to Yalkut Yosef.
So you're saying that you make the bracha, you slice the challah, and you should eat the challah before you even pass it out to people?
Yes.
Got it.
Now, because that fulfills the sheet of the Ramah, but the Mishnah Berurah said that most of the Achronim argue with this Ramah, and that if the individual, even though the guy had eaten it already, the one who made the bracha, the listener, if the listener already spoke before he got to eat, he'd have to make the bracha again. So if we follow the Mishnah Berurah, which most of us do, everyone has to eat before they talk. If the botzei, but it's still a good idea for the botzei to eat quickly, because at least according to the Ramah, the people will be okay. At least there's somebody to rely on. We normally rely on the Ramah. And the Yalkut Yosef says that if one of the diners ate his bread, even before the one who made the bracha, then before anyone spoke, then if someone spoke, it's not considered a hefsek either. So someone should start eating right away, either the botseya or whoever gets it quickly.
Is there room to make hill? I'm aware of that halacha about cutting.
Yes, it can be making like the Ramah.
No, the Ramah says you should eat right away.
No. The Ramah said that if the botseya ate, then if the people talk who listened, who hadn't eaten their bread, they don't have to make another bracha. The Mishnah Berurah argued with the Ramah. The Ramah was lenient, and the Mishnah Berurah said that ev kol achronim cholken Allah, that the la'odiv hashomea mavarich atzmo kesesach kodem timosu shechozer mavarich, that even the listener, if he spoke before he ate, no matter what the botzeya did, he would also have to make a second bracha.
I know. The question I have is in the order: you make a motzi and you cut the challah. So it seems that because of a concern about hefsek, I guess, you should take eat a piece of the challah and then continue cutting.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Personally, I don't know. Maybe it's me. I have a problem. It seems, I don't know. It seems I don't know, rude or what it is that you cut a challah and you eat right away. Everyone else has to stay silent, and then you continue cutting, and people take challah. You have a lot of people in the table, right? Let's say you have 10 people on the table. You eat something, and you're the one eating. Everyone's sitting there quietly. It just doesn't.
Okay, but now you can. Now you can give a halachic explanation that the reason you did that is because there's a sheet of the Ramah that if one of you now speaks, it would be okay because I ate it already and I took care of the hefsek problem. There's a halachic reason for it, and that way you can say from a rudeness point of view, a courtesy point of view, but I did it to benefit you because I wanted to be yotzi you according to the sheet of the Ramah that if one of you talked now, you wouldn't have to make a second bracha. Otherwise you're correct.
I don't distribute that. What I do is I cut all the pieces of challah and I put them in the tray, and then I eat, and then I pass the tray around. But still,
That's the same.
this way you're not being, I don't know, it seems like a little bit boorish, in fact, when you're eating and everybody else is sitting there waiting for you while you're chewing.
But by the way,
And
you've
challah.
seen that minig in other people's homes.
Of course, I
With the- and they're-
find
and
it
they're-
boorish.
No, but they're trying to fulfill this issue of the Ramah.
I understand it.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, is that like the way to do it? Or, can you make it and not do it until you pass around the tray?
I believe that passing around the tray is the way the Mishnah Berurah wants us to do it. They want everybody to remain quiet until everybody eats. So, and that you eating doesn't solve the problem for them, says the Mishnah Berurah. So according to the
Maybe on the contrary. So maybe that's an argument to not eat, because
Yeah.
you're role modeling, hey, we have to wait until everything's in the tray and then I can eat.
I would say that according to the Mishnah Berurah, the way you do it is perfectly fine, because you're not gaining anything by eating quickly. It's just the sheet of the Ramah that you fulfill, and the Mishnah Berurah says most of the Achronim argue with the Ramah, so it actually defends your minig.
Okay.
I'm going to stop here. Because there's some more stuff to say about Birchas Hamotzi, but we're going to go into Pas Bekisnin, which is a complicated issue. We have 2 shiurim on that. Let me ask you a question. Wasn't there something about the 9 days or the 3 weeks that we were supposed to, we skipped it and we were going to learn it during this period, or am I dreaming?
Sounds familiar. Yeah,
So
yeah,
That's the
Ernie.
Yummy.
Yes, Ernie.
Down.
Hilchos Tisha B'Av was
Oh.
the end of volume 12. I
Okay.
think we skipped it on
Okay, so
purpose.
I would suggest that next week and the following week, we learn Hilchos Tisha B'Av.
Well, Tuesday is, we'll learn Hilchos Mafseka Suda, which is perfect. We'll probably get through most of what we need to get through. They're just
I mean-
next week.
Hang on. We have hang on,
Next week is Erev Tisha B'Av already, Tuesday.
yeah. No, Tisha B'Av is Thursday.
Right.
Wednesday night. So Tuesday is Erev.
Okay, so we'll learn Hilchos Tisha B'Av next week.
Volume 12.
Go back volume 12, we'll do that next week. We probably should have done that tonight, too.
Next year.
Okay. Shavua Tov, everybody.
Uh,